Welcome back, everybody, to First Round Frenzy. Matt and Kole here. We are 3 weeks away from the NFL draft. We're getting closer and closer. It's an exciting time. We've gotten through two sections of divisions, the East and the North. Now we're moving
Mhm.
down south, AFC South, with a very interesting division. All the teams have a lot of holes. There's not really the Texans are the front runner for sure, but the other teams are a few pieces away from potentially competing with them again, especially with the injuries and the offensive line issues that the Texans have. So should be an exciting division to watch this year.
Yeah, I don't think this is probably like the worst division in football, but it's one of the more competitive year in and year out because you don't know who's gonna come away with this division. I mean, it's like the last couple of years, the Jaguars, I mean, besides last year, but like 2022, 2023 is like the Jaguars and the Texans are like right there at it. And then, or I guess not, 2023 is like them and the Texans,
And the
Jaguars
Texans.
and Texans, and then the year before the Colts are right there with them. So always a fun division. We'll see how this shakes up this year, but at least one new quarterback joining this division. The other three teams found their guys in the draft, so we'll see what the Titans do, and if they get their guy and that guy's Cam Ward, we'll see what kind of impact he can have early on, and if this Titans team can get back into the AFC South hunt sooner than later. But yeah, a pretty fun division.
Yeah, so let's get started with the Titans. They are currently on the clock with the number one overall pick. The
Yep.
biggest news over the past few days, the news that's been circling around, is the fact that the Titans canceled their visit with Shador Sanders after his pro day. There's conflicting reports. They just canceled it. Some people said that they met with him at the pro day, so they didn't need to do it anymore. But it's looking more and more likely like Cam Ward is the pick at one. Obviously they need a quarterback. That's a huge deal. They've completely restructured their roster this offseason. They brought in an entirely new secondary unit. Johnny Hecker to punt, Joey Sly to kick, Morgan Cox to be the long snapper, and Justin Hardy as a gunning specialist. They've brought in a lot of O line help. You bring in a longtime starter, Dan Moore, who's going to hopefully fix that revolving door at right tackle, most likely. Um, Maybe the left tackle. It's they need someone at right tackle, so I would not be surprised
Hmm.
if he goes there. Kevin Zietler to play offensive guard, as well as some depth there. Bring in a long-standing 100 tackle plus guy in Cody Barton to play linebacker, and some some quarterback help in Tim Boyle and Brandon Allen, as they lost all of their quarterbacks except Will Levis this offseason. So it'll be interesting to see how the Titans kind of build this roster through the draft. They only have two picks in the first three rounds, one of which we're all assuming is going to be Cam Ward, so quarterback, but they still have a lot of holes, right? You got Calvin Ridley, who's your wide receiver two. Is it a Van Jefferson who you brought in? I don't think that's who you want. Traylon Burks obviously has not been good the first few years. If you bring in a new quarterback, does that help him? But wide receivers interesting. Offensive line could be. And since they're leaving Abdul Carter at one, apparently, allegedly, do they go edge rusher? Because they need some help there as well. So it'll be interesting to see. They could go in a bunch of different directions here with their two picks.
Yeah, and it's kind of they've had an interesting offseason. I mean, they do a one and done at the GM position. They get rid of Rand Carthon. They bring in Mike Borgonzi, who I really like Borgonzi. I think he's going to do a
Yeah.
really good job comparatively building this team back. And it seems like he has a much similar aligned vision with Brian Callahan for what they want to do with this team. Special teams clearly was a big overhaul that they wanted to do
Yeah.
because their special teams was horrible last year. And notably, the multiple times during the season, Brian Callahan blamed some of the struggles of when they were losing on their special teams, which it was more than just that because they had the number one pick. Just bad special teams doesn't give you the number one, but definitely was a concerning problem. But I like their offensive line. I think the
Yeah.
addition of Dan Moore, while they overpaid for him, I think he goes to left tackle, moves J.C. Latham back to his natural position on the
I
right
would. Yeah.
side, and
Yep.
then you got Skoronski, a first round pick, Lloyd Cushenberry. You paid a lot of money for him at center the year before. And Kevin Zeitler, I'm surprised they even were able to splash on him. I was wondering who that right guard was going to be because I didn't think Zeitler would be an option. I thought maybe the Bears would try to get him with the Ben Johnson connection. I thought Detroit honestly wasn't even going to let him leave the building. I thought they were going to try to bring him back. So that was a big upgrade. And I think their starting five looks pretty set now for the first time in a while in Tennessee. And at the, the quarterback position, those two additions, Tim Boyle and Brandon Allen. Tim Boyle, kudos that he's still in the league at this point. That guy will always make it to a roster in April somehow, some way. But I wonder what happens with Will Levis because Brandon Allen was in Cincinnati with Brian Callahan, and that seems like a more fitting scheme fit at the backup QB position behind who we assume to be Cam Ward at number one. So that might make Will Levis a little bit of an expendable option. Maybe like someone goes down in training camp, they could see, Will Levis get flipped for a third or fourth round pick, kind of like they did last year, flipping Malik Willis to the Green Bay Packers. So I wonder if Will Levis potentially, finally gets parted ways because they were kind of fed up with him after the 2024 season on that coaching staff.
And, we never know. You never know what could happen. And Will Levis could end up being the starting quarterback next year if they decide to go Abdul Carter at number one. It's seeming very, very likely that Cam Ward's going to be that pick. But it's draft season. You have no idea what's going to happen. I mean, Will Levis, I'm not very high on him. We know that. It doesn't seem like the Titans are very high on him, but they did attribute a lot of the issues to that revolving door on the right side, that he had no time to throw the football last season. So with an improved offensive line, do you go and potentially go with an Abdul Carter at one, see what Will Levis can do? And if you're as bad as you were last year, you go out and get one of the quarterbacks next year. I don't think that's the way it's going to go, but it is something to keep an eye on because, if they really like Abdul Carter and they think he's a generational talent, are you going to let him go? That's the question. So we'll see, but we can get right into the mock draft here. Only 2 picks, as I mentioned. There's they don't have much in that range that we keep talking about, the 20 to 75. So could they potentially make a trade with Will Levis, potentially pick up a 3rd round pick or an early 4th to kind of get some more capital in that area? We don't know. But with round 1, pick 1 of the NFL draft, Cam Ward of Miami goes to the Tennessee Titans. I think that just makes all the sense in the world at this point. Will Levis, we talked about it just a few seconds ago. He's not very good at quarterback in the NFL. You can attribute the offensive line all you want to his downfall, if there even was one. But even with a clean pocket, he was missing open throws. He was underthrowing balls. He was overthrowing balls. He was throwing picks. He was making bad decisions with the football, which cost teams games. Which cost his team games. Just his 1 or 2 decisions that he would make. And I think Brian Callahan wants to bring in his quarterback. We see that a lot when there's, coaching changes or GM changes, in this case, both. They want to get their guy to run the offense, and that's what Cam Ward is going to do. We saw him in his pro day, very, very solid. His tape looks good. He's able to drive the football. He's a great playmaker. There's not much downside to him, in my opinion. And with the improvement on the offensive line, I don't think you should be concerned about putting the quarterback into a bad situation.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm wondering, like you said, like they don't have a 3rd round pick. And if they can flip Will Levis before, like in the next 3 weeks, that would be the most telling sign of the direction they're going at quarterback and also getting more draft picks to build that team around Cam Ward. So we'll see if that happens before or after the draft. But either way, like I don't see Will Levis on this roster. And just because he's too reckless of a player, which is fun. Like for the fan base, it's exciting because it's fun to watch him just be an absolute maniac out there with the ball and behind the center. But when you're in the business of winning football games and the business of trying to play consistent football, it's not good. So they definitely need an upgrade there. And if they think Cam Ward's the guy, I agree with it and have been saying it for a while that he is far and away the best quarterback in this class. So, it's just whether or not he can take that step and be a franchise leader from day one, because that's kind of what this team's going to have to rely on him to be.
Yep. And, we move on to pick round 2. They've got pick 35, another early pick in round 2. And there's a bunch of different directions that they can go here, right? I mean, they need they pass on Abdul Carter at 1. Could they go with an edge rusher that's available here at 35, right? We're hearing about Mike Green or James Pierce potentially dropping out of the 1st round. That would be a steal. Getting a Donovan Ezraku, who's probably in that 30 to 40 range, consensus wise. But for me, I'm going with wide receiver. I think getting Cam Ward another weapon. Treylon Burks has been an experiment that hasn't worked out. Could he potentially resurge? Maybe. You never know. But really, Calvin Ridley is the only weapon that they have in that offense for Cam. So get a guy that's a little bit of a gadget guy. We've talked about a little bit, a guy that's a first round talent potentially that is dropping out of it. And that is Luther Burden III out of Missouri.
Mhm.
I think that makes all the sense in the world. You could go tight end, but I think that's something that isn't necessarily their biggest need. And that's the rookie quarterback's best friend. So why not get the next best thing, a guy that can do anything, a guy that can catch ball behind the line of scrimmage, take end arounds, deep routes, whatever you need him to do, he will be able to do it. The one concerning thing for me is the guy that he reminds me of the most, at least draft process wise. They're not necessarily the same player, but that is Treylon Burks. I kind of have the same feeling about Luther that I did about Treylon Burks during that draft process, is he could potentially have the same kind of career path. I'm hoping it's not the case. He's currently 53 on my big board, so he's dropped out of my top 50. But I think he's got the talent to be able to succeed at the next level. So getting him at 35, it's a little bit above value, I believe, consensus wise. Most people are having him in that 35 to 40 range from what I could tell. So we'll see what happens, but I think he'd be a good gadget weapon to have in that Titans offense.
Yeah, and most importantly, I think Luther Burden has an opportunity to be a reliable number two to that offense. And that's kind of what pretty much they need behind Calvin Ridley. And even demoting Traylon Burks to a wide receiver three, you still have him on the field in a lot of packages and try to see if eventually he can find his footing and, get into a good stride. Learning that offense, the second year under Brian Callahan and getting him figured out to hopefully not have to just pivot off him after the 2025 season and go with somebody else as a wide receiver three. But I definitely agree. Like in that second round, I would also be looking at a wide receiver with that pick. Edge rusher is an option, but I think they really like Arden Key, and then they brought in Draymond Jones from Seattle. And the interior is stacked. I mean, Big
Yeah.
Jeff Simmons, Devondre Sweat, and then Sebastian Joseph Day. I like all three of those guys on the interior, and I guess they're going to see, what they can do. They got Lorenzo Carter too that they brought in off the edge, so they got some pieces there. Just some veteran guys to see, who sticks because that's kind of where they're at. As a roster construction right now, but maybe even throwing a flyer later in the draft on the edge rusher with high upside could be the key there. But yeah, wide receiver two, hopefully, whether it's Luther Burden or someone else, maybe someone else falls out of the first round.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Amika
Emiko
Egbuka
could
is
fall
getting
out.
some.
Yeah.
Yep. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting. I mean, I think the reason why I went wide receiver is I don't think the Titans are very scared of their division's offenses. So it's not really the priority to go out there and waste a high pick on someone where you feel confident. You don't have the superstar player, right? But you feel confident in the players that you currently have in the locker room to get it done against your divisional opponents. I just the Jaguars, we have no idea what's going to happen. Trevor Lawrence has not been the player he's supposed to be, right? The Texans' offensive line is atrocious. And then obviously the Colts, they have no idea who their quarterback's going to be. No matter who it is, you don't expect anything better than like 55% completion percentage. So I mean, I think at this point they're like, all right, we're going to get our franchise quarterback. Let's give him as much help as we can get early on, and then fill some other needs later on, and hopefully get some value. I think that personally, what I'm thinking that is what they should do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And maybe even trading back from 35 could
Yeah,
be an option. If you can't trade Will Levis before the draft, early day two, you have someone try to move up, and then you slide back, get some later picks, and then you still look at the wide receiver list that could be there if you move back a little late in the second round. You can still get Jack Beck, you could still get Isaiah Bond, Trey Harris. All those guys easily could fill that wide receiver two role as well. So they got a couple options with who could fill that role, but that seems to be the direction here we're leaning is you get Cam Ward and then you get him a new guy to go to with that offense.
yep. All right, so let's move on to the team we just talked about for a second, Jacksonville Jaguars. They're a team that should be a lot better than they are. It seems like they have everything they need here. there are some holes that they hopefully fill. Um, but they should not have the fifth overall pick. Trevor Lawrence should be playing much better. The offense in general should be much better, and the defensive front that they currently have is elite. So that should not be an issue either. But here we are, fifth overall pick. Kole, how have the Jacksonville Jaguars addressed the offseason so far?
Let's start with getting rid of mediocrity. Like Doug Peterson, I never really thought that he was the best option to be their head coach, especially with what they had with the young team. And they needed just a new innovator for the offense that was younger, more in tune with the modern offense. And Trent Baalke needed to go probably 3 years ago at GM. I was remarkable he was even still there. It was remarkable they almost was still going to be there in 2025 until
Yep.
they finally made the right call to get rid of him. And then they bring in a young guy in James Gladstone from the LA Rams. And a lot of people want to give the guy discredit him because he looks like he's hired him to be a general manager. But Sean McVay loves this guy. Les Snead loved that guy. He was pretty much running all of their pro scouting. So he knows veterans, he knows how to work free agency, and they kind of did an interesting, free agency approach. I mean, the really big signing was Diami Brown, adding them to their offense, but they still got Fred Johnson, Chuma Edoga, and Patrick McCarry on the offensive front. Jordan Lewis, I think, is a good addition at corner. So I think that really what Gladstone showed in his first couple weeks of free agency on the job is that he wants to build his team through the draft and get a young ecosystem in place and really slowly start building this team up that way. And Liam Cohen, say what you want about the Duval and all the talk about Liam Cohen, but they really made an effort to get this guy in. I mean, jump through a lot of hurdles to get him into Jacksonville. And that's what I'm talking about, the young, innovative approach. Another guy that's from the McVay tree, who's got the fresh, modern style offense. He's going to bring that in to this building with Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas. So I definitely think it'll be a much more exciting Jaguars team with these two guys leading it for the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I feel with Liam Cohen, he did so much for Baker Mayfield and helped him kind of turn around his career from what was a very disappointing end in Cleveland. Not necessarily that Baker played badly, but when it wasn't what he was supposed to be. In these past few seasons, Baker has really taken big strides as being a potential top 10 quarterback in the NFL, right? And I think
Mhm.
that's what Trevor Lawrence needs. When he was coming out of college, he was a generational talent, right? He had all the tools in the world. The tape spoke volumes. He was going to be elite, but he hasn't really done anything. So I think bringing in Liam Cohen could potentially be a big game changer and hopefully turns his career around. Now, Gladstone, I think that says a lot for how they might attack the draft. Gladstone's done a great job, especially at drafting defensive players. There's a few potential options. We'll see what you do, but there's a few potential options at defense at pick 5. Whether it's Travis Hunter potentially slipping to 5 or Mason Graham, who seems like the pick. Then there's Will Johnson if they want to address the cornerback position. So I think when it all comes down to it, he did a great job with the LA Rams. Obviously, Jared Verse was a huge pickup last year in the draft. He had a great rookie season. And now this time around, could he do the same thing? They already have a very talented defensive front. So bringing him in to kind of get some depth and maybe some other impact players will be huge for the future of this team.
Yeah, and like he knows how to find these late round steals too. Like he was able to help find with the Rams and coming from that department, they were really good at scouting and getting guys in the third, fourth, fifth rounds of the draft. And this team's got 5 or 10 picks in this year's class, starting with pick number 5, but they got 2 picks in the third round, 2 picks in the fourth round, and then 2 picks in the sixth round as well. So they got quite an arsenal to go off of here, and that follows the same approach where Les Snead with the Rams, he liked having a lot of picks, especially later in the draft to fill out, the depth of the roster with some high upside players, and then rely on the coaching to get them there. So in terms of defensive line interior seems like the big one, but defensive line in general, I mean, they haven't got. I mean, I like uh, Trayvon Walker, but missing out on what Aiden Hutchinson could have been to get in Trayvon Walker. was really disappointing. And then Josh Hines Allen, he's been pretty consistent as well. But even Trayvon Walker, see that? I think he's gotten, a couple
He
double
had a
digit
he had a
sack
he had a
seasons.
he had a big season this past season, big development.
Yeah.
Not Aiden Hutchinson, but I believe he had 9 or 10 sacks this
Hmm.
past season. So that's right in the range, right? You're looking for that 8 to 12 sacks. I think you'd want a little bit more out of a number one overall pick. But I think with some more improvement and maybe some more help on the defensive line, he can get a few more opportunities to get out to the quarterback.
Yeah. So that makes me wonder like what the question's going to be because I think there's a possible scenario where Abdul Carter might be available at 5. And if he is, what's the decision going to be? Because you have Josh Hines Allen and Trayvon Walker, two players you spent first round picks on, a number one overall pick, and then Josh Hines Allen was a top pick as well. Do you get Abdul Carter and bring him in? And then what do you do with those other two guys? So that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Hopefully, like it just doesn't get to that point. Abdul Carter goes to New England or the Browns or the Giants, one of those teams in the top four. Because it seems like all along the pick for them has been Mason Graham. And it pretty much is like to the point where you might as well just write it down in Sharpie on your list because unless Abdul Carter is going to be there at 5, Mason Graham, I think, is going to be the pick for the Jaguars. And it just makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, and I think that does make all the sense. He's a top 3 player in my opinion. You're getting him
Hmm.
at 5, so that's big value there. He's going to help you in pass rush as well as run defense. He's going to eat the both. And I think to answer your question, if Abdul Carter gets there, I think Trayvon Walker just moves to the inside. I think he has a little bit of experience there from his days at Georgia, where he lined up a little bit more inside. I think he'd have the ability to do that. And then you've got Abdul Carter there. But you also have to consider Abdul Carter has experience as an off ball linebacker as well. So maybe you play him as a hybrid type player, right? So there's different ways that if that happened, I think it would work out. But it's so unlikely. I think everybody's saying Mason Graham's the pick here. I don't think anything else can happen.
Yeah. So now going to the second round, pick 36. I'm torn between like the second and third round, I think is going to be a corner and a wide receiver in some capacity. They got 2 picks in the third round. And I think 2 of those 3 picks will be like one corner, one wide receiver. So it was a toss up for me trying to determine who I wanted. Like, do I want a corner in the second round? I think that the wide receiver has a little bit more depth than the cornerback position. So it would make sense to go one early. But I think if Jaden Higgins is on the board at 36, I'm going to pull the trigger on him. And you added a guy alongside Brian Thomas Jr. to that offense because he was incredible as a rookie. You brought in Diami Brown. He's going to be your slot specialist. But then on the other outside position, you have Parker Washington and you have Gabe Davis. So I want to add just another body to that room in Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State. I don't think we might have thrown him in before at one of our other mocks earlier in this process, but I just want to throw him in here because I think he is a real good fit for Liam Cohen's system and what he can, operate and just having more bodies and more options for Trevor Lawrence is going to be key to continue that. And then I'm going to get the corner in round 3, pick 70 in Kobe Bryant out of Kansas. And another one where I looked at like AZ Thomas, I looked at Darian Porter potentially with this pick, but I'm instead going to go with Kobe Bryant and fit him into that defense because you got Jordan Lewis. Like I said, he's going to be your nickel corner. They paid top dollar to make him like one of the highest paid nickel corners in the league. But on the outside, you have Jarian Jones and Tyson Campbell. So now you add Kobe Bryant to that room, potential option to be a starter or just be a high upside cornerback 3. But I mean, they were the last ranked defense in terms of passing yards allowed last year. They need help at that position. That safety, they have Tyson Campbell, who I like, and Darnell Savage from Green Bay. So we'll see how those two do. Maybe safety could be an option at some point for this team. And then pick 88 in the third round, I'm going to get Terrence Ferguson instead of a safety. I thought about a safety there because I like the safety, grouping potentially going to be in the third round. But I want to go with Terrence Ferguson. They like Brenton Strange and want to give him the shot to be, the tight end 1. Obviously, after letting go of Evan Ingram, they did bring in Johnny Mutt and Hunter Long, but I think Terrence Ferguson offers a little bit more athleticism than those two guys and kind of gives you a similar player back that you had in Evan Ingram, but for obviously a lot cheaper of a price tag. So I think those 4 picks will put Jacksonville in a pretty sweet spot to kick off the draft, and they have 6 more picks after that, which is absurd.
Yeah. And I think it makes all the sense in the world here. First of all, I love Terrence Ferguson, one of my favorite players in the draft. And I think that makes all the sense in the world to go and get him there. $88 would be very good value in my opinion. I have him much higher than that.
Mhm.
And Kobe Bryant's an interesting one. I think he's someone that he's kind of split opinions on. Some people have him up here in this, early third round range, where other people probably have him slipping to day three. There are some question marks about what he can be, but it'll be interesting to see what they do here because there's a lot of cornerback depth at this range, right? We're looking at Kobe Bryant, we're looking at Quincy Riley, we're looking at Darian Porter, as you mentioned, Jacob Parrish. So it'll be interesting to see how the cornerback market kind of goes here because we've already talked about Benjamin Morrison, Azariah Thomas, Trey Amos, Siobhan Revel dropping out of the first round and being kind of like that second round grade. It'll be interesting because if all those guys drop out, do you go with corner there at 36? If all of them are available, I mean, it's going to be hard to pass up, especially when you can get guys like Jack Betch, as you mentioned, in the early third round, or Kyle Williams. Maybe a Jalen Knoll slips out and he ends up there. So it'll be interesting to see how a team like Jacksonville attacks this because there are so many different ways that you can go about building a roster. And I don't think there's a wrong way necessarily in this. I think you're going to get two quality players. Just what do you value more at this point? So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think that's just going to be the toss up. Like I said, the corner at one of those spots, wide receiver at the other, and you kind of just have to decide which one you're going to luck out on. And, value wise in the third round, you're going to find a better value wide receiver or a better value corner. But I like Kobe Bryant's, the length. He's a very long armed cornerback. The athletic traits are there, the ball hawking tendencies are there. He's just got a few like nuanced things in his game to clean up on, but, to develop into being a starter, which is why I like him being, starting out as that cornerback three and having Jerry and Jones and then Jordan Lewis and Tyson Campbell above him. So like the outside cornerback number three, I think would be good for his game just to start out as being a high level backup for that team and then, try to eventually develop him and, get those things in the proper refinement in his game to be a potential starter going into maybe 2026. But just a long-term pool to hopefully find a guy at corner is why I went with Kobe Bryant. But I think the same thing with AZ Thomas. I still don't know if Azariah Thomas was going to be there potentially at that pick or not, because I think he could be a late day two guy
Yeah.
or
All right.
late
Well,
second round guy.
like the second round guy.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on to the Indianapolis Colts, a third team in this division with a top 15 pick. And the Colts are a team that is very interesting going into this year. Obviously, the big news was Daniel Jones going to the Indianapolis Colts. They lost Joe Flacco, who was a big veteran presence in that quarterback room, and some people were saying was performing better than Anthony Richardson. Their big time first round pick, just what was it, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? And there's a lot of people, including guys like Pat McAfee, who are very critical of Anthony Richardson and how he's played and how he's handled himself. There's definitely justification for those concerns there. But outside of quarterback, there's a lot of holes to fill. They were one of the worst defenses in the league last year. They allowed a lot of scoring. They allowed a lot of rushing yards. And even the passing defense was not good either. But in free agency, they addressed the passing game a lot. They bring in Cameron Bynum, Travarius Ward, as well as Corey Ballantyne. So they bring some depth into that secondary. And then outside of that, they didn't really do much. They brought in Daniel Jones, as we mentioned. They brought in Khalil Herbert to kind of be some depth at the running back position. And they brought in Neville Gallimore for the interior of the defensive line. So with all the people that they lost, I mean, the list is very, very long. Joe Flacco has mentioned, Mark Lewinsky, Mo Alley Cox, Ronnie Harrison, EJ Speed. Who else was it? Will Fries and Ryan Kelly. All those people that I mentioned were key contributors to this team.
Yeah.
And I feel like they did not replace them at all. They've got a lot of holes to fill. So if some guys don't step up and they don't have a good draft, they could be a team that's vying for the bottom spot in the AFC South.
Yeah, they're always an interesting team. I think this is going to be the make or break year for Chris Ballard at GM, and it's going to be with this draft and how the year plays out with Richardson and with Daniel Jones and how they operate the quarterback room. But I don't think I don't know if they'll go full reset if the 2025 season doesn't work, because I still think Shane Steichen can be a really good offensive-minded head coach. I love getting in Lou Amarillo
Yep.
as the defensive coordinator. In terms of the offensive line guys they lost, I think they did a good job, prioritizing getting ahead on losing those guys.
Yes.
Because I really like Tanner Bortolini and having him. He was already kind of taken over last year at center when Ryan Kelly was going down. And then Matt Goncalves at right guard as well. I like, I liked him coming out of the draft. And they brought these guys in the draft, having starters in place, knowing those guys would eventually leave. And even on the defensive line, they lost Deo on Degbo. But even him, like he wasn't even a full-time starter for that defense, because they still had Samson Ibaka, they had Kwity Paye, Leo Tulatu. The interior's great. You talked about adding in Neville Gallimore as a depth with Adetomiwa Adebawore, and then Grover Stewart, DeForest Buckner. I think the defense line's pretty good. And as a whole, that whole defense, I think, has a lot of talented players. And Charvarius Ward was a huge pickup. So was Cam Byam for that secondary, for Lou Amarillo to do some work on the defensive side of the ball. So it's really just, does Anthony Richardson finally get a fire lit under him? Or can Daniel Jones come in and lead this team? And, how far can they actually, either player actually lead that offense
Yeah.
is going to be the question.
I'm a really big fan of how they've built the trenches. I think,
Yeah.
there's going to be question marks about the top end of the offensive line group. You and I were both really high on Adetomiwa Adebawore when he was coming out. So hopefully he gets some more snaps this year and goes off. But there's going to be questions about the top end talent, the starters. I think the depth is going to be there. But losing Fries and losing Kelly are two big pieces that you lose. So we'll see how, some of those guys come in. I mean, Bortolini obviously has a decent amount of playing time as a starter over the past few years. I believe he started 5 or 6 games last year at center. So he does have the experience. But I think interior offensive line is going to be something that the Colts end up going after early on in this draft.
Yeah, especially because if one of those guys don't work out, they don't have the depth guy to replace. So they definitely need some competition there going into camp to try to, solidify those two at least interior offensive positions for sure.
All right, so we can go right into this. As we mentioned, they have 3 first round picks. Sorry, 3 day 1 and day 2 picks here. Round 1 pick 14, round 2 pick 45, and round 3 pick 80. So they've got a decent selection here early on. I don't think they make any moves. I think they're pretty happy with where they're at right now. And they'd be very happy if the guy that I have taking 14 is available. And that is Tyler Warren, the tight end out of Penn State. I think Tyler Warren is the player that could potentially save Anthony Richardson's career. Anthony Richardson has not been a good passer of the football in his early on in the career. I think he forces a lot of things downfield because, let's be fair, a lot of his weapons are downfield targets, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at an Alec Pierce. We're looking at A.D. Mitchell, right? So, and we're looking at Michael Pittman. All these guys are better deeper down the field. And Anthony Richardson really hasn't had a safety valve. And obviously you lose Mo Alley Cox, who's your number 1 tight end over the past few years. And since Jack Doyle, they really haven't had that star player at tight end. And Tyler Warren completely changes that. He's a guy that can catch the ball behind the line of scrimmage and make something happen after the catch. He's a guy that can run the seam route. He's a guy that can run in and out and be that underneath guy. So I think Tyler Warren would be the ideal pick here for the Colts. I think the one potential hiccup in this is if the Jets end up going tight end at 7. I'm hearing more and more that it's going to be Armand Membu or Will Campbell go offensive line. But tight end is definitely a position of need for the Jets and could see that happening. But I think Tyler Warren is the pick at 14 if he somehow drops there.
Yeah, and I think this could get interesting because if, say, the Jets pass
Yep.
at what, they're 8?
7.
7. So they pass at 7. 8's Carolina. I don't think Carolina's going to go tight end. The Saints possibly could, but I think that's also a spot where maybe the Colts could trade up. If they
Yeah.
really like Tyler Warren, I think they could swap with the Saints. And they don't have the biggest draft haul because I just pulled up their picks. They only have pretty much one pick in every round.
Yep.
So they don't have the biggest. It probably takes some 2026 selections to move up with the Saints, but I think the Saints are in a worse off spot, and we'll talk about them, later next or later
Next
this week when we get
Thursday.
to
Yep.
yeah, and we'll talk about how bad off the Saints are in the short and long term. But they need more picks, in my opinion, in New Orleans, and moving back from 9 makes a lot of sense for them. And also the amount of talk that Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen and Ryan Poles in Chicago have been having about Tyler Warren. If the Jets pass on Tyler Warren, I don't think you have to, you know, I don't think that the Colts should hope the Bears pass on him as well. That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say.
Yeah,
I think
that's
that
true.
it's possible they can consider moving up with the Saints, and if the Saints don't want to do it, and Tyler Warren's off the board by 14. I think Colson Loveland as well still makes a lot of sense. Different style tight end, but still a big body, intermediate threat in the middle that, obviously Anthony Richardson really needs because he can't just throw the outside bombs every single play going into 2025.
It'll be interesting to see if Tyler Warren's not there, what they end up doing. Do they love Colson Loveland enough to take him at 14, or do they wait and go with an Elijah Arroyo or Terrence Ferguson or a Gunnar Helm or a Mason Taylor
Mason
in
Taylor,
the
yeah.
second round, right? And you fill another need here. Maybe you go with a Tyler Booker or a Gray Zabel, or you go with a
Mhm.
safety in Nicky Manwari and Malachi Starks. So there's a bunch of different things that go here. I think they're all hoping that Tyler Warren is there at 14, or as you mentioned, trade up with a potential team. But I think Tyler Warren would be their ideal candidate. Then I'm going to follow right along with Field Yates's latest mock draft and go with Carson Schwessinger at pick 14, at pick 45. We already mentioned they lost EJ Speed, who was their starting linebacker, and their defensive front, as we mentioned, has plenty of depth. So why not go out and get a linebacker, sit in the middle of the field, be a guy that can rush the passer, but as well as drop into coverage. Carson Schwessinger is one of my favorite players in the class. He is my linebacker 3 behind Jihad Campbell and Jalen Walker. That's actually another pick I was thinking, potentially Jihad Campbell at 14 if they decide to
Yeah, definitely.
not go with tight end there. Jihad Campbell's the one I think Mel Kiper was talking the other day that he's a guy that could potentially fall out of the first round, just based on the shoulder injury, I believe it is.
Yeah.
But Jihad Campbell would be a really interesting one at 14 as well. But
Or
really,
even 45 if he
yeah, or
drops.
45. If he drops all the way to 45, that would be the steal of the draft. I
Yes, for
don't think
sure.
there's any question about that. But Carson Schwessinger he's really flown up boards this draft season. He had a really big season in 2024, and he's going to be a guy that can be a very, very capable player for this Colts defense. And then finally, at pick 80 in the third round, I think his teammate Jared Wilson would actually be a better pick here, but I went with him with the Vikings, so I decided to change it up a little bit. And Tate Ratledge at pick 80, I think he's a guy that can really be an all-pro level potential guard in the NFL. Obviously, him and Quentin Nelson as your two guards would be really exciting.
Really, yeah, really good.
And also best hair in the game for Tate Ratledge. But I think Jared Wilson would be the better pick here just because he can play center or guard. And after losing your center and starting guard this offseason, I think having the flexibility of a guy like Jared Wilson would be just a little bit more enticing. So if they're both available, I wouldn't be surprised if they went Jared Wilson over Tate Ratledge. But I'm a really big fan of Tate. I think he can be a very, very solid player at the next level.
Yeah, so for Carson Schwessinger, I've really started to come on to him the last couple of weeks and really think he can be a good player and possible like consideration to be maybe a first round pick.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens with him too. But I think if they can land either, like you said, Jihad Campbell at 14 or Carson Schwessinger in the second round would be huge for that defense. They already got Zaire Franklin, who is good for about 128 sacks a year, or not sacks, tackles a year, because that guy's
Yeah.
just all over the football. But losing EJ Speed is huge because they relied on, having the two linebackers and two strong present at linebacker with him and EJ Speed. And even Lou Amarillo, like last year with the Bengals, having Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt as his two linebackers, and even had Oren Burks in there a little bit toward the end of the season, getting him ramped up. So I think linebacker is definitely the key there. And then, yeah, Tate Ratledge, like I said, beforehand, getting some kind of depth and competition at that guard spot with Gon Cliz just to see, who's the best player of it. And it's worth it in the third round. if you can find a guy that can start over Matt Goncalves and give you more assurance at that position up front.
Yep. So we'll see what happens. Colts are a very interesting team, as we mentioned. A lot of different possibilities of how this goes. But we'll see. They're a team that's going to be one to watch come draft night, because there could be movement, there could be surprise picks, whatever it is. They could be a very interesting team to watch. So
Yep.
let's move on to the prize team of the AFC South, a team that would made the playoffs, but probably shouldn't have based on the way they played most of the season. CJ Stroud got absolutely destroyed behind the line of scrimmage. So we'll see what happens. But they're a team that, despite being very good, has a lot of holes to fix due to injuries and recent trades that a lot of people were very skeptical of. So, Kole, let's take it away.
Yeah, I think the Texans are probably like after all the talk they had, like the people hating on them all year long, the fact they still went 10-7 and won a playoff game. And the second year of D'Amico Ryans and the second year of CJ Stroud, I think they're still sitting in a good shape. And there's all the talk of the offensive line room was toxic. They weren't good teammates. That's why they, shipped off Laramie Tunsil. D'Amico Ryans was really good and really quick about getting ahead of that and saying like that's blown out of proportion. We just need better, more consistent play. Was really good management by him as a head coach. And he, the last 2 years, I really loved what he's been doing as a head coach for that team. And just, I hope he's there forever because he is the perfect coach in Houston and try to get that team back into relevancy again. So I think that everything's here. I think if you just build this offensive line back, this team has the ability to compete in the AFC. And we know Nick Caserio and his tendencies coming from New England. He likes, the big time programs. He likes versatile players. D'Amico Ryans has been adamant that, they have to improve on the offensive line. And, no crap, everyone could tell you that after watching them last year. So it's just in terms of what those additions are going to be made. I mean, they got in Trent Brown, they got in Ed Ingram, uh, Jerome Carvin, Laken Tomlinson, all guys who are good depth to have behind the starters. And then Cam Robinson, I think of those additions is the only one that's going to be like a true starter. But even he's on a 1 year deal at left tackle. So then you're looking at Cam Robinson at left tackle, Titus Howard, Jarrett Patterson, maybe Juice Scruggs or Ed Ingram at right guard, and then Blake Fisher or Trent Brown at right tackle. It definitely looks a lot better on paper than what they had last year. And everything else is still there. I would like to see a wide receiver addition because it's going to be a while till Tank Dell gets back from that. That was a bad injury again that Tank Dell had. So it's going to be a pretty lengthy part into the 2025 season until they get him on the field. So they need someone else with Nico Collins as like a true number two. I know they got in Christian Kirk, but I want to see another addition made to that room. And then defensively, D'Amico Ryans had that unit playing as one of the top defenses in football. And I mean, the aggressiveness and the energy is all over it. I mean, you got Will Anderson, you got Daniil Hunter, Aziz Al-Shaair, Derek Stingley, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Kamari Lassner. Like these guys are freaking dogs out there on that defense. Even Jalen Petrie at safety. I love that defense and the energy and mindset that D'Amico Ryans is instilling into those guys. I mean, that alone makes that such a fun team.
I was going to say, they made some big additions on that defense as well. You mentioned CJ Gardner-Johnson, EJ Speed, who we were just
Yeah.
talking about with the Colts, Sheldon Rankins coming in as an interior presence. I mean, they have done a great job building this defense up. On the offense side of the ball, you already mentioned the wide receivers. I was going to bring that up. Tank Dell obviously injured most likely for the entirety of the season. It's maybe he can make a late season comeback, but I highly doubt it. And really, you didn't do much, right? You brought in Christian Kirk, who's been very inconsistent, has a few good years, but really not much of a threat except deep down the field. And then you bring in Braxton Berrios, one of my favorites, and Justin Watson. There's some young talent here. Xavier Hutchinson out of Iowa State, who I really like, could potentially be another Iowa State guy coming into this team, maybe. And then John Mechie III, who played pretty well down the stretch for Houston as he had to get more snaps after the Tank Dell injury. So it'll be interesting to see how they address that, whether it's a second round pick, third round pick. There is conversations about them potentially going wide receiver in the first round. I think offensive line's probably the move there. We'll see what you end up doing. But, as you mentioned, they have done a great job building this team. We'll just have to see, can the protection hold up for CJ Stroud, because I think that's going to be the biggest need for them. One more target and a lot of protection for CJ.
Yeah, and again, we'll see what happens, but I think the wide receiver position is going to be interesting because I was kind of skeptical of, the decision to get Christian Kirk. I mean, it
Yep.
makes sense to get a true slot in there because then you can bounce Tank Dell maybe on the outside once he comes back. I know he doesn't quite have the size for it, but just for matchup purposes, could be a lot of fun. And I was really hoping that this team, after losing Stephon Diggs and deciding not to bring him back, would go full on of like the Buffalo Bills approach. And we're going to get like a bunch of wide receiver twos in here and just have, a bunch of role players that can
They went
scatter
wide
around
receiver
and
threes instead.
yeah, all of yeah. So we'll see because they still got again. Nico Collins is a pure number one, and it's just filling out the rest of the matchups behind him at that position. And I wonder maybe even adding in a running back to that offense. I'm trying to get the. I mean, I do like Joe Mixon a lot, but once he went down
Yeah.
for part of the season, they really struggled when
Damian
they had
Pierce
to.
didn't have the kind of
Yeah,
season that he had in year one.
Fair
Um,
Ogunbowale either.
yep. So it
So
that is something. I mean, the thing is though, there's such a deep running back class that they can wait until day three and get a guy that could potentially make an impact. You never know. Maybe they end up using one of their day two picks on a back. There's a lot of quality at the position, but I would not be surprised if they use multiple picks on offensive line early. So it'll be interesting to see if they really like a running back. I could see him going out and getting them, but I think offensive line is going to be the key for them. At least two picks in the first 2 days.
yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and get with that then. Start with a draft, and it starts at 25 for the Texans, and that's kind of a weird range for the offensive line because again, I like Cam Robinson, and I think he's going to be a good, decent starter, but he's only on a 1 year deal, so I considered maybe Josh Simmons could
Okay.
make sense here because you don't have to rely on him, per se in 2025, but then he takes over the next year. The same, for Kelvin Banks. I really liked Kelvin Banks being this pick up until the Cam Robinson selection. But I'm going to go with Gray Zabel, a guy that, he's not a big program guy, so I don't know how much Nick Caserio was going to like him, but he likes the versatility. And Gray Zabel's got position at all five positions, or experience at all five positions. So you can bring him in. Maybe he can be an option at center. They have, Jarrett Patterson and Juice Scruggs, but still an option at center or either of the two guard positions. It's just a high upside guy that can play multiple positions in a plug and play where you can't really go wrong by taking him instead of drafting a tackle you might not necessarily be starting right away. So I'm gonna go him. Gray Zabel at 25. The second round, I'm gonna get Kyle Williams. I think he's really rising. So I think pick 58 potentially could be on the radar. It still seems high right now. Like when you go on mock draft
Yep.
database and where he's at, he's in like the 70s and 80s ish. But based on what I'm hearing on social media is everyone likes this guy and that Kyle Williams is going to go a lot higher than people expect. So for him, it's the big play generation. Outside, maybe a little bit inside, but I think he's a really good deep ball tracker. And really, that's what that offense is missing. Outside of Nico Collins, they need another person to help stretch the field. And, he also has some short area quickness to his game. So I think he fits well with, the tank, Nico, and then Kyle Williams, long term for that offense growing with CJ Stroud. So, Kyle Williams, second round, and they have two third-round picks. So this is where it gets interesting because I thought about getting a running back here. But like you said, doubling up on the offensive line is a good move. So I'm going to go another small school guy, Charles Grant at pick 79 to be a potential long-term tackle behind Cam Robinson. So you get a good depth at left tackle because right now, even behind Cam Robinson, you got Zach Thomas and, I don't know if Trent Brown maybe or, Blake Fisher, whichever one doesn't start at right tackle. It's like a good swing
Yep.
tackle option, but you need a long-term guy there. So Charles Grant, take a swing on him, see what he can do. And then pick 89. Again, I wanted to go running back. But I'm going to go with the big dog on the defense, Deion Walker. He's falling on some draft boards because it wasn't the best combine,
Yep.
but a guy of his size and a guy of his role, you don't need him to have a good combine. You need him to go on the defensive front, put him in on goal line, put him in on short yardage, and absolutely collapse three lanes in the run game. Because I think that On defense, the position they don't have the most depth at is the interior of that defensive line. You got Sheldon Rankins, Tim Settle, and then Mario Edwards. Add in a guy like Deion Walker to that unit as a rotational guy to help with the run defense. Their run defense ranked 11th last year, and everything else was pretty much a top 10 unit on the defensive side of the ball. So shore up that run defense, get another guy in that rotation. And then as for the running back, I still think they can get one. I mean, you look
Right.
at their top 30 visits, they met with Brashard Smith out of SMU and Jaden Blue out of Texas. Like you said, day three, you could bring in one of those guys to just add some talent and some speed to that running back room.
Yeah. I mean, we're even looking at guys like Cam Scatterbo, who could end up
Yeah.
dropping to day three, right? There's so much talent in this running back class. Raheem Sanders, Taj Brooks, DJ Giddens maybe drops to day three as well. So there's plenty
Hmm.
of talent there. And I think what the Texans have is they have options, right? We already mentioned that they have a good core, right? They just need to build up this offensive line. They know that they need to spend two picks. Doesn't really matter what two picks. Gray Zabel's an interesting one. I've been hearing a lot about him potentially going in the top 20. The Bengals are a team that I'm hearing a lot about, even though they should go defense. I'm hearing potentially Gray Zabel there at, what is it, 17 or 18. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, you already mentioned Kelvin Banks and Josh Simmons. Josh Connerly is another option there at 25. If they end up not going offensive line in round one and end up going, wide receiver or something else there, you're looking at Wyatt Millum, who I really like in round two. You're looking at Arante Ursary in round two. So they have so many different ways that they can kind of go about this. They just know we need two offensive linemen. Doesn't really matter when. We'd like to go high. But I think they're going to go with who they like. And if there's someone they really like in round one at pick 25, they're going to go for it and then save offensive line for round two. But I think what you have here, despite them all being small schools and them not going for small school players, I think this would be perfect if they end up going this way. Because I think Gray Zabel, immediate starter, Charles Grant, swing guy that could potentially get in and be a starter down the road. And then Deion Walker's he's a beast. I mean, he's
Yeah.
just going to sit in the middle there and crush people.
Another scenario I thought of with the first two picks was maybe Emeka Egbuka in the first round.
Yep.
Former teammate of CJ Stroud. You bring him into that offense, but I don't know how he would clash with Christian Kirk in the slot. But I thought about it. It'd be fun. We'll see. And then if they do that, go around in the second round and get, a multi-positional interior offense lineman in Marcus Mimbo. I
Mm.
considered that,
Yep.
but I'm going to go with the Gray Zabel, Kyle Williams as of right now.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think the Kyle Williams one, as you mentioned, there's so many wide receivers there. I'm really high on Kyle Williams. I like him, but whoever they end up liking, there's going to be someone there for them, right? Like
Yeah.
it just depends on who they end up liking. But that's it for the AFC South. So, Cole, how do you see this division panning out? Is it going to be the exact same as last year? Do the Titans potentially jump some people? What do you think is going to happen this year?
I wonder if Jacksonville, how quick they can get back on track. So, like you said, I think Trevor Lawrence, with a right offense and the right pieces around him, still has the ability to be a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. He's paid like it, and he's played like it in the past, and gotten to the playoffs and won playoff games. So, I wonder how quick Liam Cohen can turn that team around in year one and maybe get them back on track. But I think this is still the Texans' division to lose. I think the Colts probably finished fourth because I think there's going to be a lot of issues at the quarterback position, and they're going to start swapping and just throw it all out of sort and end up with a regime change by the end of the year. So I think they end up last in this division, and the Titans, they're the wild card. I mean, I've always been a wild card in this division because back in the Mike Vrabel days, this was a team making deep runs in the AFC playoffs with a roster that should not have been making deep runs in the AFC playoffs. And then again, it's a different coach, different mentality for that team now. But if they can get out the gate running and Cam Ward proves to be that guy, we'll see what happens. But I think I think they end up third in the division, though. I think it's going to take a year or two to get Cam Ward really rolling with that team and, just build around him slowly. So I think it's the Texans division to lose, and I think Jacksonville takes a big jump next year.
I completely agree. I think it's the Texans division to lose. And I think the Texans and Jaguars, if everything goes right for the Jaguars, are going to bully the other two teams in this division.
I
And
agree.
that's why the Jaguars could potentially be a wild card team going into next year, right? I mean, if they go out and they win, all four games, against those two teams, I mean, and even if they lose both to Houston, I mean, they are 4-1, or sorry, 4-2, or 5-1 in the division. They could potentially be a wild card team after that. And then with the Colts, I have a feeling Anthony Richardson is going to be the starter out of the gate, right? He was their top 5 draft pick. Yes, he has had his struggles, but you spent this draft capital on him. He's got to be there. I think they're going to pull the plug a little bit too early. I think it's going to be very similar to what the Jets did with their head coach and GM. Just after 4 weeks, firing him instead of letting him play out the season. And I think Anthony Richardson's going to have a rough few games. They're going to take him out, put Daniel Jones in because they paid him money, and then Daniel Jones is going to struggle. It's going to be the exact same thing, and they're going to keep flip-flopping him, as you said. So I agree. I think they probably end up 4th unless Anthony Richardson turns it around. And then Titans, I think, just based on how bad the Colts quarterback situation is going to be, I don't think they're going to be good. I think they still have a long way to go, but I think they still probably have a top 10 pick this year. But I think they end up getting just above the Colts in the division.
Yeah. What I'm really hoping for once we get toward the end of the 2025 season is I want an absolute insane 7 seed race in the AFC between the Broncos, the Chargers, and the Jaguars.
Yep.
That would be would either of those teams really do anything coming in at the 7 seed? I'm not really sure what
Hey,
the strength of the other 6, but
Denver could. I think they already made the playoffs once. I think with a year in between, add a few weapons in there, I think Denver could do something in the playoffs. But I agree. It's going to be a dogfight between those 3 teams. Maybe the Dolphins
yeah,
potentially in
Dolphins
there
are an
if Tua
option.
stays healthy. No, not the Jets. But no, it'll be that kind of bottom half of the playoff field, 6-7, is going to be a dogfight for those spots.
Yeah. And again, I don't think it'll matter much. The AFC is so strong at the top, but that'll be fun to try to battle out to see who gets that last wild card spot would be cool because I think Jacksonville, if they rebound, could be one of those teams in consideration.
100%. So it's very interesting division, the AFC South. One of the worst divisions in football last year, potentially improving this year. And then we go to another bad division in football, the NFC South, coming on Thursday. Some improvement, some young quarterbacks, potentially some more young quarterbacks coming into the division later on. But that should be an exciting one that we go on Thursday. So
yeah,
we'll see you
sounds good
then.